IOL10 weekly meeting with Tatiana. It sounds wild. What I've realized in the business is that sometimes the closest people actually get the least amount of time. So I'll prioritize like all my business meetings with everyone in this building right here, but then when I'm tired and exhausted, then I'll come back, we'll meet later. It's like, no, we have a standing meeting, L10 on the books to be able to connect. We're talking about goals, certain things on the events, things of the house, but that's really allowed us to really make sure that we're aligned on the same page. You are gonna bump heads, and that's beautiful, and healthy friction can be good, but also too, it's very clear to us, it's like our relationship is more important than the business. So if it gets to the point where things aren't working well and this is gonna break our relationship, then hey, the business needs to take a back seat. But again, it's also knowing like your zone of genius. If Tatiana comes to the table and from an operational level, from a detail perspective, she provides some sort of recommendation, unless it's egregious, I'm gonna say yes, like decision made, off you go. If it's like big things in terms of, expansion or negotiation for a lease or sales and marketing, that's my go-to. So just figuring out what your zones of genius are, and then you have to lead each other. Tatiana leads me in certain aspects, and I lead her in other certain aspects, and that's okay.
Welcome to the Fitness CEO Podcast.
Hey there, friends. Bryce Henson, your Fitness CEO, and shooting an intro off a recent podcast episode that we just shot. And really what we did is we brought in all of our franchise partners that just finished On-Site Experience, which On-Site Experience is our new coaches and new franchise partners, I should say, onboarding training, where we bring them out to California. We also have a location in Michigan for a 5-day practical intensive event. So we can give them the on-site experience to lay the foundation for what they're gonna be doing as opening their own Fit Body Bootcamp location. So it's a great way to do a debrief, learn a lot, connect, and also provide some coaching. So I think you're gonna love the episode, so get ready and stay tuned.
So I feel like, all of us here are new owners of a business, right? For the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you started, what's one gem that you can give us? Because there's gonna be a lot of things coming at us, right? Like from different parts of the business. Mm-hmm. What's one gem that you can give us that made you like stay like headstrong and stay level-headed and just kind of relax yourself from all like the stressors of the business?
Whew, that's a great question. I'm going to give you a few different kind of looks. One thing I didn't know, which you clearly all know now, is the value of culture and relationships. I came in from the setting where as I shared my story a little while back, my first fitness mentor, his name was Adam. And he took me through a 2-year period, but really hyper-focused over 6 months, and he showed me circuit training, and I got an awesome result. So from a fitness and fat loss perspective, I was like over the moon. I, of course, knew that it changed my life, but I was so excited at this, and especially launching Fit Body Bootcamp, I thought that all Mrs. Joneses were going to be that fired up and dedicated and really militant to get the exact same result. And some are, right? And granted, this is what we need to be able to provide support, but most are not, okay? Most want a welcoming environment. They put their families and their coworkers and their friends in front of them, and this is really one of the only times they can actually make for themselves. So they want to be loved up, they want to be cherished and valued and build community from a relationship lens, from a community lens, from a positivity lens. That is the number one thing at Fit Body Bootcamp by far, without a shadow of a doubt. So I missed the mark probably for the first 6 months, and I was a little frustrated. I'm like, Mrs. Jones doesn't want it. Well, no, she just doesn't want it as much as you want the result for her. That's okay. If she wants the result in her own thing, it's not about you, Bryce. It never has, and it never will be. It's about Mrs. Jones. So having that mental shift made a huge difference for me. And then in terms of things to make sure that my head's in the right space, I always like to believe that I come from very humble beginnings, but it really allowed me to develop a strong mindset. My father is a drug addict, addicted to alcohol and gambling, not the trifecta, which is usually good for a family upbringing, but because of that chaos that ensued in my life, and many maybe can you relate, or you've had family members or other people in your life in a similar type situation, but that really developed a high amount of emotional resilience, if you will, to help me with that. But I work hard, I run hard, still every single day, but I also have me time. As soon as the evening is done, my hours are early, but when I finish and I'm done about 6 p.m. in the afternoon, then I actually don't work the rest of the evening. So I just have times where, again, kind of going back to the batch process, like run it hard. Like I'm here, I'm 90 minutes fully focused at you. There's not one distraction that's gonna pull me away But as soon as that job's done, I'm here running the company. And that's the same kind of for you. So whatever, different outlets that you need in your life, that you, releases, if you will, maybe like hiking or running or walking, but make sure you, dedicate time for you. For me, I like to travel. I don't get to travel too much from a personal perspective anymore. It's more work than anything. But tomorrow, I'm actually going to see one of my best buddies in Seattle, Washington for a couple days. So I'm going to connect with him, and then Sunday morning I'm back at Dominating Sunday, getting ready for next week. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
In terms of building or keeping your vision alive, not only your personal vision and also your wife vision, how do you guys incorporate both goals, and in order for both of you individually and also as a couple, make it actually work?
Amazing question, especially like, you and your significant other, Felipe, like you guys are working this together. So, that's a very, very spot on question. In many ways, like the relationship that I have with Tatiana from a working perspective is amazing. Like we're going to Australia next month to visit her family for Christmas. It's going to be a long trip for me because it's not a vacation for me. I'll be working while I'm there, and my team knows this, just the way I operate things. But there's no way if she was working a different career that we could spend, or she could spend 3 weeks and I can spend 10 days in Australia or do some of the other things. So there's a lot of value in that spouse because we're on the same path and moving the same direction. But also too, it can be challenging, right? Especially if you don't necessarily see eye to eye. I think it's important in human nature. There's roles, and my role in the relationship, I'm the visionary. Like I have the big ideas. I certainly take action and fulfill those ideas, but typically speaking, that's not her zone of genius. Like I'm usually the one from a creative and a visionary perspective, bringing the path forward. She, does an incredible amount of work to like support the mission. There's a lot of details that I miss, right? So she's able to like clean those up and make whatever my vision better. And that's probably a good analogy of this particular operation right here. I have a lot of awesome visions, some's not so good either, but that's just part of being a visionary. But many times I'll have a strong vision, but then I'm looking at my team right here, they actually make it better. As an example, okay, on-site experience. I come back and now I share very little of the details of on-site experience because it changes in a very good way all the time, and my finger's not on the pulse there. I just trust my team. Every single iteration, they're making it better. Last week, as an example, shooting different content to be able to help and promote the brand. I had the vision, okay, just generally speaking, what this looks like and how I want it to be. But then Pablo and Lauren, who are basically execute the Fitness CEO podcast, they set up the setup and they came up with questions. It actually blew my mind. I had this little vision, and they just made it way better. So I think in your relationship you have different roles, and Omar, you might be the visionary, or maybe not, maybe be Felipe, and it's okay. So I think it's just about establishing like what's your zone of genius, like where do you guys provide the most value, and then typically in those areas of genius, then you let the other person lead, and vice versa. And generally, I lead the relationship in the household in terms of our business partnership, but there's a lot of things from the details and certain aspects of the business that she has way more situational authority, so she makes a lot of the calls, if that makes sense. So it's just kind of to kind of put a bow on it, understanding both your zones of genius, and then just making sure that you actually connect on a weekly basis. And the last point, I'll give you a very tactical piece of advice. We have our L10 weekly meetings that we have for our team. I have an L10 weekly meeting with Tatiana, and it's important enough for us to, and it sounds wild, okay, but what I've realized in the business is that sometimes the closest people actually get the least amount of time. So I'll prioritize like all my business meetings with everyone in this building right here, but then when I'm tired and exhausted, then I'll come back, we'll meet later. It's like, no, we have a standing meeting, L10 on the books to be able to connect, and that right there, it's a small strategy or a tactic that actually will open up big things for you. So I would highly encourage you to do something like that if you haven't already. And it's only 30 minutes, so it's straight to the point. We're talking about goals, like certain things on the events, things of the house, all the things. But that's really allowed us to really make sure that we're aligned on the same page.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That was a great question.
Yeah.
Because we're already running into
It's pretty
hey,
that.
social media pages. I haven't seen you post anything. He's a creative guy. And he's like, I'll get to it later when I feel like it. So we're having those, like, when, for lack of a better word, bumping heads on like, hey, why not? And I'm like, you should have already been done.
Oh, you're gonna bump a lot of heads. That's the thing. But you also too going in, like I put like everything in writing in terms of responsibilities of the certain area of the business, so we're all on the same page. You are gonna bump heads, and that's beautiful. I mean, that's just part of the process. Healthy friction can be good, but also too, it's very clear to us. It's like our relationship is more important than the business. So if it gets to the point where things aren't working well, and this is gonna break our relationship, then hey, the business needs to take a back seat. But again, it's also knowing like your zone of genius. If Tatiana comes to the table and from an operational level, from a detail perspective, she provides some sort of recommendation, unless it's egregious, I'm going to say yes, like decision made, off you go, because that's her zone of genius and that's her area. If it's like big things in terms of expansion or negotiation for a lease or sales and marketing, that's my go-to. So just figuring out what your zones of genius are, and then you have to lead each other. Tatiana leads me in certain aspects, and I lead her in other certain aspects, and that's okay.
Now I have a question. Now, what would you say the number one thing is that keeping your team at, well, even here, your team here being the CEO, and your team at the Mission Viejo location, how do you keep them so motivated, driven, focused? What would you say the number one aspect in that has been for you?
Man, you guys are well prepared today. That's an awesome question. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm always working through, right? My job is actually to create opportunity, create space for opportunity, and then for my team to kind of jump in and execute that opportunity. And that's your job. So at your location, it's like your job is to cast a vision that's so big that your clients can fit in that vision, your team can fit in that vision, and then you see upwards growth. Now, it doesn't work for everyone. People have their phases, so come and go. But for me, it's interesting, the opportunity for me to be your CEO, and although I always like to clarify, I'm your CEO, I work for you, not the other way around. And that's really, just genuinely speaking, how you have to look at leadership. Like, you work for your team work for your clients. If I walked in like I was an ivory tower, it's like you do this, you do that, I would lose so much fallout with my team. It wouldn't even be funny. I wouldn't want to do that anyway, but it's the exact opposite, coming from a servant, approach. So, that's a good piece of leadership coaching to begin with. But my job is also to like look around corners and see like what big opportunities I can, provide. And for me, as your CEO, there's a lot of benefits to Jake and John and Mission Viejo in terms of my affiliation with the organization. There's a lot of disadvantages as well. I ask my team the most out of any other franchise partners. We're typically testing things at my location first, Barrett as well, and the rest of our CAP team, which that sounds sexy and exciting, but when you test, just by definition, things fail. Not everything works out well. So all the stuff that you see have been tests that have actually ran through this, the sake of time, or the filter of time, to been successful. So John and Jake are also taxed with dealing with a lot of stuff. We were the very first one to migrate for Fitbro Tracker. You're going to get on Fitbro Tracker, and no technology is perfect, but it's really solid, and it's only getting better. My locations, Tatiana, John, and Jake, they had to deal with a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. That's me not sugarcoating it. So that's just one example, and many of disadvantages, but the advantage is I have a great platform, and also too, if I can find ways to add value to them, to show them a path, what also adds value to the brand. Now I'm in a very unique perspective on that. That's not something that you'll necessarily have leverage against, but that's where my mind goes. How can I provide more value to them while also leveraging the bigger picture? And but that's a framework that you can also look through in your development of your team. And typically speaking, like providing leadership opportunity, providing a path for growth. And I forget who said it. Was it Dee or Megan or Amy? I forget. But about being a personal development program. Is that you, Dee? Self-development program. Honest to God, we are a self-development program just wrapped up into a fitness business. Mm-hmm. That's really what it comes down to. I didn't know this to be true, but a lot of your all-stars, like John, like Jake, you're going to meet George, who's Barrett's integrator, who runs the on-site experience in Michigan. The reason they still continue with the organization is because the level of growth and opportunity, and bring in the world conferences and bring in lead. They're like, in no other job have I ever been assigned reading or signed videos and podcasts and given all this access. So don't underestimate that. it's not a one size fits all. For the right people, it's going to be an amazing opportunity. For some people, they're like, hey, no, I'm just want to punch my clock and I'm out. That's not the type of people we look for. So all this to say is like looking for growth opportunities from a positional perspective, but also looking for growth opportunities from a personal development perspective. The last thing would be, and even forget about headquarters, would be knowing playing to strengths. As an example, Jake, as you know, very big parrot, very easy to talk to, right? I decided to launch a local podcast. Now, without Jake, I would not have launched a local podcast. I got a lot of stuff on my plate, okay? And for me, in the grand scheme of things, I can batch process it. Really, I can knock out 3 podcast videos downstairs in about 45 minutes, and that's 3 months of content. So in the grand scheme of things, the lift is light for me. But Jake now has the opportunity to actually once a month a new episode goes out that he gets to interview a client. Now, from a logistical perspective, we just book 3 shoots a year, 3 Saturdays. We batch process and bring 4 people in, and then we just knock out the interviews back to back to back. So it literally takes him 4 hours of time for 3 times a year. And now we have a client case study, okay, that we push out on a monthly basis. And if it wasn't for Jake, I probably wouldn't have executed that. There's a lot of value in that, but is that 100% needed? No, it's not. But because Jake's personality, it's a cool opportunity. Now he has a podcast host. Did you hear him? Did he make an announcement about the podcast at all this week?
We saw it advertised.
Okay. Every week we have the different announcements, so he was hitting it last week, I guess, as it turns out. But when he announces it, it's like, my podcast, Fit Life Orange County, it just, highlighted this. He's so proud, and rightfully so. The guy does an incredible job, but it's an opportunity that I saw. Knowing him, I was like, all right, cool. I know Jake, he wants that continued growth, right? He loves people. He loves getting in front of people. He loves being on camera. This is a cool opportunity for growth. And also, too, it's going to add a lot of value where we can highlight our clients and they have an ongoing case study. In the grand scheme of things, a very easy logistical lift. But that's an example, Chris, where I wanted to be able to provide more opportunity. That's not a dollars and cents opportunity, but that's a fulfillment, a personal growth opportunity. And if you know your people, okay, then you can look for further ways. Now, John, if Jake wasn't, and I asked John, I wouldn't ask John. That's not something he's fired up to go about it. And that's no knock to John. He brings so much value in other areas of the business. But all this to say, to put a bow on it, just knowing your people, meeting where they're at, and then showcasing different opportunity paths. For me, that's why they've been with me for a long time. And I guess to finish out from a general kind of coaching perspective, if you want to keep your clients, you need to keep your team. And in the industry, this is the challenging part of the industry. Now, the good news is we have so much structure and support from a personal growth perspective that we typically blow, people out of the water for the amount of support that we have. But it's a very transient type of industry. The average personal trainer stays in the industry for 6 months or less. Okay, if I don't keep a coach for a solid 2 years, that is not a win. Which is across industry standards, that is an amazing win. But Jake is going on 8 years. John just celebrated 4. I had a coach in my Yorba Linda location, my first location. She trained for going on 9 years. Okay, that's really, really important. Okay, so if you want to keep your clients, which retention is so important because it takes so much time, energy, effort, and money to bring a new client in, keep them, as my brother Barrett says, lock that back door. And the best way to do that is making sure that your coaches are retained.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What do you actually do to retain and lock that door with your coaches?
Great question. So the good news is, factory installed, we have a new coaches onboarding playbook and a whole different, a whole mock interview onboarding process, which is interesting. Number one, it showcases to you the level of preparation and the value of the person coming through. So example, our mock interview process for our coaches, we run them through a little workout where they have to come in and the workout is already set. We already have all the content. All you need to do is swipe and send. And when they come in, are you looking for them to be a fire-breathing dragon day one? No, not at all. You're just looking for potential. Did they put in the work? Did they actually prepare? Or can you clearly tell they did not prepare at all? Also, how do they take feedback? You take a 30-minute session and we just do 2 10-minute little, kind of mini things. We do a 10-minute mock and then we break for 10 minutes and then the coaches give one piece of feedback. How did that person respond to that feedback? Do they, dig their heels in? Or they're like, oh my God, that's great feedback, and they incorporate in the second round, even if they're not great of a coach, because everyone's gonna suck. It's just our job is to reduce the suckage factor in the interview process. But that gives you like a really good indication. But way more than that, it actually showcases to that person that like, hey, there's structure, there's leadership, there's support here. Then when you bring them on, we have a new coach's onboarding playbook. For the first week, they're watching videos, one of me kind of giving the overall vision of the brand, but also like personal growth and that type of videos. And they're thinking, wow, this is like a different experience. I'm being asked to like read content and listen to podcasts and actually get a lot of things. So already just factory installed in terms of your partnership with FitBody, we have an incredible onboarding program which just sets the tone. Okay, so that would be the first thing. Secondarily, the meeting structure is really important. Making sure that you have a weekly meeting with your team, you're pouring into them, and it sounds so basic, but there's so many businesses that actually don't operate this way, okay? So we already have that installed, but making sure that you meet with them on a weekly basis. Making sure, following the playbook, of having one check-in with each team, each coach on a monthly basis. So in this case, Jake, our head coach, he meets with our team. Now granted, it's a small team, in the grand scheme of things, so we do a half an hour conversation on a monthly basis. But giving your teammates like FaceTime is like pouring into them. Bringing them to World Conference and Elite Training. We have two. I unveiled yesterday on the quarterly State of the Business, which you guys were tied up in, more important training for where you're at in the process. But we're going to condense our trainings next year into two massive, big, energetic trainings. One, our Elite Training, which is our regional training, and the other, World Conference. So the Elite Training is going to be the first weekend of April in Detroit, Michigan, or suburb of Detroit. So we're coming to the East Coast, and then our World Conference is going to be the second weekend in August in Las Vegas, Nevada. So when you bring one of your coaches to there you go. Amy's excited. You were asking about yesterday.
Dan and John, they're like, we can't tell you.
Oh yeah. I told them because like sometimes they get debriefed, and I was like, you cannot tell our franchise partners this because it just looks bad. And then our new franchise partner is like, what the heck's going on? So we're going to Vegas, and the nice thing is we're standardizing our training. So the second weekend of August every single year, which is away from June and July, which are big travel seasons, but it's before like kids go back to school and the big back to school launch, which usually is like end of August, September, October, happens. But when I wouldn't encourage you to a new intern coming through, invest in their plane ticket and all that to do that. But when you have someone that has potential that you can see, when you take them to a live event, it changes the game. Because really what it does is they're going to learn things from a tactile perspective, but the biggest thing, the most important thing it does, it allows them to drink the FitBody Kool-Aid. And when you have a coach that drinks the Kool-Aid, then like clay, you can actually mold them. So that's the biggest secret sauce. It's actually kind of like both of you coming to the training. So Felipe, if you just came to this on-site experience and Omar, you didn't, like Omar, you're a smart guy, you're very good with people, like you'd figure it out and you guys would attack and do well, like in terms of your launch. But it's going to be way more impactful that you guys are both on the same page now because you've seen the same things. And the best way I describe it, if you've ever been to a comedy club and you go out and see an amazing comedian and you're like dying laughing, and the next day you run into one of your friends and try to tell that same joke, it just never lands the same way. So when you go back to your team and try to download your team, it just never downloads the exact same way as if they were there with you. So the last bullet point, aside from like the onboarding, the structure, the weekly meetings and all that, if you can bring your team, World Conference, unlimited tickets are included, to World Conference and or the Elite Trains, we have 2 big trains a year, I promise you this, they will enter that training and they will leave that training completely different people. And that's been the success with John and Jake. I've taken them, I've flown them, actually on my own dime, I decided it was a good idea this year to send them to Berkeley's on-site experience because iron sharpens iron. I want them to cross-train. I also want to intentionally build a relationship so that my team, both different on-site experience and different level, are working together so they feel like they're connected. So manufacturing relationships, that's actually my vision behind that. I've sent them to on-site experience. Last year we had a mastermind training in Orlando, Florida. I've sent them on world conferences. I continue to pour and invest in them, and when you do that to your team, you'll keep them for years. So that was a lot, but hopefully you can peel a couple of those different tactics, and it makes a huge difference.